everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, freelance writer for Billboard, Variety, Goldmine, Access.com, and wherever else I can drop my pen name. I'm welcoming you to another session of Things We Said Today, where we talk about the Beatles, past, present, and we even kind of look into our crystal ball sometime and predict the future. Let me introduce you to our two regular co-hosts from the state of Maine, our musicologist and formerly, once upon a time, was the head of the Beatle desk at the New York Times and now writes for the Wall Street Journal and is the author of Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything, and the Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop. Mr. Alan Cosin. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone.
I got that all out in one breath.
Incredible.
How about that? I know. And from the state of Connecticut, the host of the syndicated Beatles radio show, Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hey, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And me, I'm the author of Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones. I never plugged that, but I'm going to plug it today. Anyway, we have some news to go through first. Speaking of the monkeys, Michael Nesmith announced, or actually Mickey Dolenz announced yesterday that he's going to be joining Mickey Dolenz as a special guest on two shows this week in the Los Angeles area. For you, those of you in that area, by the time this show goes up, I believe the shows will be happening. But one of them is at the Canyon Club in Agoura, which I've been to. I saw Peter Asher there a couple of years ago, and it's a nice little club. And some of the people that play there are absolutely astounding. I think Brian Wilson has played there, among other people. But anyway, it's a great little place. But that should be fun. Ringo did a Billboard interview this week talking about Tom Petty, who, by the way, is on the cover of the latest Billboard magazine that I just got in the mail today, and there's a bunch of articles in here and ads memorializing Tom Petty. Ringo says in the Billboard interview, "I'll miss Tom. Tom was a good friend. I played with Tom. Tom played with me. I got to know him over the years. Really got to know him when he was in the Wilburys because of George Harrison. All through my career, we've lost really great friends and people who aren't my friends but were great musicians and writers. In our business, we've lost them very young as well. But overall, there's still a lot of us out there doing what we do." Also in Billboard, in that issue, is a full-page Paul McCartney ad. Or I should say it's an ad about Paul McCartney. It's from SMG, which is the concert promoter, and says, "Thank you, Paul McCartney. 3 nights, 3 SMG venues, 3 venue records broken, 1 amazing artist." And at the bottom, it lists Intrust Bank Arena, Chesapeake Energy Arena, and CenturyLink Center. So interesting that Paul got a full-page ad. There's back to Ringo. He made as promised, he had made a $100,000 donation to the Vegas victims and dedicated his first show at the blank.
Planet Hollywood.
Planet Hollywood. Thank you. At the Planet Hollywood in Vegas to the victims. The set list that evening included 1 song from the new album, the title song, "Give More Love." And I know a couple of people commented on Facebook when I posted that information that they were kind of disappointed that Ringo didn't do more songs from the album and push it a little harder. I honestly didn't expect him to do more, but what do you guys think?
Alan, you want to start?
Alan?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's a kind of a missed opportunity because this album has so much good stuff that he could have added to his set list. I mean, some of which have members of his band on them, and it seems to me that, this is an album that, a lot of people kind of were a little more excited about than Ringo album than they normally are with Ringo albums, and maybe it's not going to be played on the radio if he's going to promote it, and people are going to perhaps be persuaded to buy it. It's going to be through seeing him play the songs live and saying, "Hey, I'll go get that."
Right.
So I don't really understand. I don't understand what he's doing. I mean, I understand that he wants to play the oldies and. It's an entertainment rather than a promotional tour. But, he's making a new album. I would have to think that anybody who bothers to make a new album wants as many people to hear it as can hear it.
Right.
So why not play some of, there's a number of good songs on that. I don't see why he is playing just one. And the one he's playing is, I don't know. To me, when we talked about it, it's an okay song, but it's kind of a generic recent Ringo song, whereas some of the other songs really have a lot more going for them, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of all the songs on the album, I was surprised he picked that one. Ken?
I agree totally with Alan, especially after all the times we said that We're on the Road Again is a natural.
Right.
By the topic itself, and it's a great rocker, and it would work really well live. And Steve Lukather wrote the song with Ringo. Steve Lukather is in the band with Ringo. And, you've got all these other songs that I really think would work very well live on stage. I just think a song like Speed of Sound, it just has it would really work well as a live song. And I think Ringo has resigned himself to the fact that he's not going to sell like he used to. I know several years ago he was saying, I know I'm not going to sell like Britney Spears. But at the same time, if you're not going to promote your own work, then you're part of the reason why it's not selling. Although you can't expect Ringo to be up there in the top 10 with this album, but he could have an influence on him at least being on the charts.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why he can't do a couple of songs for the new album, at least while it's brand new and he just released it. Mm-hmm. It's another thing if it's a year later, maybe he doesn't want to give it as much attention. But it just came out. So I don't understand why he wouldn't at least do We're on the Road Again.
Right. The one thing, as I mentioned in my story, is I was told that the set list will be added to once he leaves Vegas. They're playing a little shorter set while they're in Vegas, which I don't really understand. I mean, why the set list has to be shorter in Vegas, but.
Well, you know something? Ringo has played at a lot of
casinos.
Right. Casinos, as a rule, give you a shorter show because they want you to go out there and gamble.
Right.
It's always been that way. And I've noticed that when I've seen Ringo at Mohegan Sun in the past. That's true. It has been a little bit shorter, those shows. And all concerts in particular that I've seen at a casino. Mm-hmm. So that could be the reason why.
Well, the question then is, will he add a song from the new album once he gets out of Vegas? So, or will he? How many songs he will add, what he will add, and whether they'll be from that album. So we'll see. I hope so.
He also may not have had enough time to rehearse with the band a new song. So I mean, he's got one new song in there.
They usually, they usually jam rehearsals at the beginning of the tour, before the tour starts. I mean, they take like 1 or 2 days. So that may be it too. And, I know that when I've seen him later in the tour, there's really a difference. You can tell that they really gel together as the tour, goes on. Mm-hmm. So, but are you seeing him on this tour, Ken?
I'm seeing him for 2 shows. I'm seeing him at the Beacon in New York City, and one of the shows in New Jersey, back to back on the 15th and 16th.
Okay, because he's not playing California this time. So
of November, by the way, 15th and 16th of November.
Okay. Anyway, all right. So there we go. Oh, and also in that issue of Billboard, the Beatles hold 3 spots on the Billboard 200. Abbey Road is 134. Beatles 1 is 173. And Sgt. Pepper's is squeaking in at 199. So, anyway. All right. let's get on to the show, or to the main part of the show, and that's to talk about, to continue the discussion actually that we started a couple of weeks ago about where we were talking about whether the Beatles were keeping their legacy, how well they were responding to, or how well they were taking care of their legacy through their releases. We've talked about the solo Beatles in 2 shows, and now we're going to talk about just the Beatles. And I mean, this is one of those questions that that people debate all the time, and I don't know that anybody will ever be really satisfied. I mean, they have done some good things, but they've also done some less than good things. I'm glad they finally put out the Hollywood Bowl, for example, but they didn't put out everything, which I wouldn't have expected them to, especially with the audio problems on the one show. But at least that finally is out there, and it's not, although it was bootleg for years, so that's a good thing. It's just there are so many things that they could do that they have not done, and we keep hoping, let it be as a gaping hole in the releases. I mean, they have done a lot, not so much recently. I mean, everything they've put out recently has been basically, the stereo vinyl box, the CD. At least they put out the mono CD box, which I thought was a great thing. The Love album surprised me. I really didn't think that was going to be all that great, but it actually is very listenable, and it's actually one of my favorite albums now. The Capitol albums, even though they put out the U.S. box, which isn't really the U.S. albums, the two volumes of Capitol albums, I think, are a great thing. A lot of people, I know a lot of British people, or some British people I know, kind of wonder about that, but I thought that was great that they did that. Let It Be Naked, I didn't particularly care for when it first happened. That's grown on me a lot. I really like the sound quality there. The anthologies I didn't particularly like. I think the anthology albums were piecemeal. The anthology video, I think, is great. And why we don't have a Blu-ray on that, I don't know. I think I predicted last year it was coming, and it hasn't. But anyway, but I think there's a lot that they can do, an awful lot. Ken, you wanna start?
This is a pretty complicated topic.
Yes, it is.
Because when we approach a topic like this, whether it's group or solo, I look at two different things. I look at what's important for new and casual fans, and what's more important for what I consider to be hardcore fans. And you guys can disagree on this all you want. But, I mean, when you were talking just now, Steve, about whether or not you're pleased, it's more about whether all the things that you'd like to see released are released. But I'm just as concerned about whether or not new fans discover the Beatles. And this is something that I've been feeling even stronger as the years go on, because unless you do have new young fans discover them, then your audience will just get older and die off. And that's not to say that the older fans don't count. Every level of fan should count. But I'm pretty much pleased overall with what's been done. I think most important is whether or not the catalog always stays in print, and whether or not it's the best sound quality. And I'm still so pleased with the 2009 remasters. I think it's so important that periodically they get remastered again in whatever format is the format of the moment, whether it's Blu-ray, audio, whatever it is that you want. Every 10 to 15 years, maybe, the catalog should be remastered. So that's something that I think should always be of concern. I love the fact that the Sgt. Pepper box set came out this year, and I think it's going to open up the doors to the rest of the Beatles catalog. That's just my own general opinion, even though we've heard that there's a very good chance that next year there'll be something on the White Album. But I do think, like I said before, if you divide between the new and casual fans with the hardcore fans, you need to keep putting out stuff that would please the new fans and casual fans too, and also please the other ones. I do believe, and maybe because the Sgt. Pepper release came out this year, that will open the floodgates for the entire Beatles catalog. But I'm not necessarily thinking about all the outtakes coming out. I think the most important outtakes should be out. The outtakes that show an evolution in the songs, how they developed, if there are versions that were noticeably different or a different arrangement than what came out. And every single Beatles album deserves a remaster with a bonus CD with outtakes. Now, you can debate whether they deserve box sets and more elaborate packaging and booklets and the mono with the stereo and everything else. You could probably, I certainly wouldn't disagree with Rubber Soul and Revolver getting that treatment, as well as the later albums. But I think that's what should be done. Through the years, and I'm looking back to, the 70s, even though the Beatles had nothing really to do with the compilations that came out in the 70s. They had no control over those things. That was a pretty important decade for the Red and the Blue albums to come out, for rock and roll music to come out. They sold extremely well. The compilations kind of fizzled after a while on the Beatles in the early 80s with Real Music and 20 Greatest Hits. But then later on in the 90s, you had Live at the BBC and the Beatles Anthology, and I happen to disagree with you, Steve. I thought those were really good releases. Not perfect, but they gave us a glimpse of what lied in the vaults, for some of us that didn't know, and had some really good, interesting outtakes that we never heard before. I think when you hear takes one for Got to Get You Into My Life and Tomorrow Never Knows, which are the highlights for me, because it's so noticeably different from what was to follow. That's the kind of thing that I'd like to hear more of, on the other Beatles albums, if it ever gets the kind of treatment that I just recommended.
My big problem with the anthology is the way they spliced them around and cut them up and messed.
Oh yeah.
I think if they had just put the individual outtakes out without messing around with them, I would have been fine. But they didn't do that, and and I think they really botched that. But
they did that on some of them. But there's plenty of tracks on the Beatles anthology that they didn't touch at all.
Yeah, but the ones. Yes, it is sticks in my head. That just irritates me to have to, the way they mess that up.
I think we all liked it at the time. I think the dislike is now retrospective because we've seen what they did with the Pepper Box, which was a totally different approach. But at the time it came out, I think we were all pretty thrilled to have anything, that amount of unreleased material, 6 discs worth,
Well, no, I think there were complaints at the time, but remember too, I remember that Ringo said, "That's all there is. There ain't no more."
Yeah.
Which, yeah, everybody knew, that was not true, but. No, I do remember hearing complaints about that at the time. And in fact, it seems to me I read them in Beatle Fan at the time. So, and your point about the BBC, Live at the BBC is, you are right. Those are great. I mean, I know there are people that would wish that the Great Dane sets would have been the model for what the Beatles put out, but that wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't.
Why?
Well, I mean,
but why?
What?
Yeah, there are a lot of people, various jazz people and other rock groups, particularly jazz, I'm thinking, where they put out a complete radio recording set, it goes on for as many discs as well. At this point, the Great Dane wouldn't even be adequate because there's been a lot of material that's been found since then. But why? I can't think of a reason why there could not have been a complete BBC release.
Well, I just think that does cater to the hardcore fan there. I mean, I love hearing all that stuff, but I'm not the average person.
Hardcore fan will reach into his pocket and take out his wallet and will buy them. So why not cater to the hardcore fan?
I think at the time that the BBC albums came out, the economic thought of the record companies was different. Now there's more willingness to do that stuff than there was.
Well, if you're Sony.
Well, I mean,
the Beatles aren't on Sony.
Right, but I mean, let's go back to the anthology. I mean, that was supposed to be a 6-disc box set originally, and they split it up.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, they didn't. I guess they didn't think that 6 discs as a box would sell, and so they carved it up. And I think that was probably the same kind of thinking that with the BBC, that nobody would buy it, although they could have actually done, for example, with what the band did with The Last Waltz and put out, a 2-disc highlight version.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. So,
yeah.
But why do we have to have every recording out there?
Because they're great, and we want to hear them.
Because
I really think that it's still a small percentage of the fans that really want to hear them. I
think it's larger than you think. I especially now. I think as the years go on, and as the original fans get older and have the prospect of not hearing all this stuff, they want it more.
I think there has to be some kind of compromise. I don't think everything should come out, but the most interesting ones should come out. If you listen to the BBC stuff, for example, they did how many recordings of "Please Please Me" on there, and who can really tell the difference between one and most of them? So is it really that essential for that to come out?
If you listen closely, you can tell the difference. I mean, when these things used to come out on vinyl bootlegs, I would take them home and I would play all the different versions together. I'd speed correct them so they'd be in the same key, and in some cases I'd have one playing through one headphone and the second playing through the other headphone. And there are differences. And, I was kind of interested at the time in figuring out which, first of all, whether a new bootleg was going to have stuff that we didn't have before, and if it did, what it was, and trying to sort of assign each of these performances to whatever date it was supposed to be, which was a lot of work, but it was fun. But they are a bit different. I mean, you listen to all the Till There Was You recordings. There's a bunch of those, and the solos are all a bit different.
Mm-hmm. I used to equate those a little bit with studio outtakes, because they actually kind of were. I mean, they are and they aren't. But I mean, I used to listen to them and I used to go, I wonder how that figured in, the way that the song actually ended up. That's the way I kind of used to look at those. So yeah, in that case, there is something valuable to be gained from those, especially those. Yeah. Those BBC recordings are.
And especially if you do them in context with the announcer talking and the bits of interviews, and if just having a bunch of tracks wouldn't be quite as good as preserving the show more or less as it was. Maybe not all the other acts, but the Beatles segments. It really gives you a feeling for the time and what was said and what they're doing at that particular point. And, there's one thing where the officially released versions, I think also I was a little disappointed, because they did some editing within the interviews and spoken parts. They're not the complete things that were said. They may take a phrase out or a sentence out or something like that. And, and why? There's no real need. But yeah, I mean, I would like to see the full BBC archive come out at some point. It really ought to. I mean, I've listened to it all many times and have never thought, oh man, the same 4 songs again and again, because they did a lot of different stuff too. They have all those songs that they never cut in the studio, which I think are probably, at least in one example, are all out now. I can't think of anything.
Most of them are out. Not all of them, though.
Not all.
Especially the early, like the first one with Pete Best.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And
You
that's
know,
another thing, the time element. When those songs were recorded, when they were done, you can hear differences in the vocals, in the band itself. I'm talking about Pete Best versus Ringo. There's a lot of elements there. I mean, that might be something for a show
Yeah.
that we could talk about it at some point. But yeah, I mean,
So,
there's. Go
Ken,
ahead.
did you finish your
yeah,
general comment about the legacy?
no.
Okay, go ahead.
But just to finish up on this, it's one thing for us to talk about this and why we're fascinated with it. I just think if you distance yourself, the casual fan out there or new fans, I don't think they're going to go that deep into it. That's why I think, like I said, with the regular catalog, if you have one disc of outtakes, that's more than enough.
Hmm.
And I am very concerned about new fans discovering the Beatles, more so, I think, than whether or not the older folks get to hear everything that's not released.
Well,
That's just
that's
my
why
own
you
thing.
also put out the 2-disc sampler set.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great release right there.
Right.
You're
So,
talking about Live at the BBC. That was a fantastic release,
right.
and it has most of the songs that they didn't release for EMI.
Right. So you
on
do
there.
them both. You put out the 2-disc sampler, and then if people, even people may decide to go on and get the bigger set, but if the bigger set's not released, they can't. If you're a casual
Okay.
fan, you start with the 2-disc set. You go through that. If you really end up liking it or listen to it, over the years, you might say, I gather there's an awful lot more of this stuff. Why don't I go buy the 14 CD set?
Well, then if you apply that logic, then you'd think that way about every single one of their albums and every single outtake should come out.
I kind of do.
Okay. Some people might think that's extreme, but again,
We're
it's
talking
not-
about the Beatles here. We're not talking about. Well, I don't want to name any particular groups, but we are talking about the Beatles. So.
Okay. What else was I going to talk about? I think over the years, even though the Beatles have nothing really much to do with this, when Beatles music is covered, I think that's very important, especially by new artists, and it gives new life to the Beatles catalog because new fans discover the old recordings that the Beatles made. I think that one thing that should change is that Beatles recordings should be in movies more. For so long, you'd never hear a Beatles song in a movie. I think that really helps to generate interest in the catalog. I mean, just where the Beatles are concerned, Twist and Shout is a song that became a hit all over again because it was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And in all these years since, whenever you have a party of any kind, if they play 60s music, you're going to hear Twist and Shout. And that's not by some accident. I think the Beatles music needs to be heard in other outlets.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that you reminded me of something I forgot to mention. On the top album sales chart in Billboard this week, the soundtrack for the Vietnam War, which has Let It Be on it, is number 49. So there you go.
But this is one like a problem that Apple had that they may have been correcting, more recently. That they, for a long time, were refusing to license music, and sometimes even retroactively. There was this great British series called Glittering Prizes. I don't know if you saw it. Frederick Raphael. It's about this group of kids who sort of go through, I guess, Cambridge, and it follows them all through their lives. And the music that they played, it started in the 50s and it ended in the 70s. The music they played was keyed to those eras. And there were a couple of Beatles songs in the series. One was they played Can't Buy Me Love. They played, I think, Get Back or For You Blue. When it came out on DVD years after it was broadcast, it was shown here on PBS. It was a BBC thing. The Beatles songs were removed. And only the Beatles songs, so far as I know. I mean, all the other tracks that were in the soundtrack were there, I believe. But the Beatles songs, which naturally I was sort of looking forward to when those episodes came up, gone. And that's like just a silly decision, for exactly the reasons that Ken said. There's all kinds of reasons that you would associate a song with something, beyond the song itself, and its appearance in a film, I think, is a big deal.
The one thing that I do believe we should have, and this would appeal to the new fans and the hardcore fans, is some kind of DVD of the Beatles live. Various live performances, and especially, there are TV appearances that you can put on a DVD.
Yeah.
Like Blackpool Night Out.
Right.
Or Drop In, the Swedish TV show. Those kind of things. I mean, when we first heard about 8 Days a Week, we thought we were going to get all this unreleased live footage of the Beatles on stage, and we got a little bit of it, but there's a lot out there that you could put together that would appeal to every level of fan.
Yeah.
And there really should be something like that. That would definitely preserve the Beatles' legacy, because most fans don't know how great the Beatles were as a live band, especially new fans.
It's not gonna happen now. I mean, 8 Days a Week was their idea of that.
Well, it may eventually. I mean, they still do have a fully produced version of the Shea Stadium concert, which they could release.
Well, that's true too.
They could put out videos of live concerts, and I mean, this is an avant-garde idea for Apple apparently, but the soundtracks could be the actual same concert that's being seen in the footage.
Uh-oh, here we go again.
Well, I mean, not to be a monomaniac, but sorry. Go ahead.
But that's something I definitely feel should be done. I've been fairly pleased with a lot of the releases from the last 20 years. In fact, I think the Beatles' Love was an astounding success. I mean, it's been in Las Vegas now for 10 years. And imagine families who take their kids to see that, and maybe they're turned on by the Beatles' music because of that. Yeah. So that was a really brilliant idea.
It's actually 11 now.
11, okay, there you go. Mm-hmm. So, there's been a lot of good releases through the years. I did like 8 Days a Week, despite that one flaw that Alan always brings up. But, that's the kind of thing that is more of a mainstream release. And as we mentioned when that came out, I think one thing that's very important was when I read that Little Steven was making an effort to make sure that that documentary film would be available in colleges around the United States. So that's another great way for young people to discover the Beatles. Mm-hmm. I like hearing about all those efforts because you got to keep attracting the young fans. And if you can do that at the same time while winning over the older fans, then that's a winning formula right there. So, but overall, I'm kind of pleased. I mean, yes, we can bellyache that so much other stuff could come out, but I really think because of the Sgt. Pepper release of this year, I think it's going to foreshadow what will happen in the near future.
I don't think we're bellyaching.
I'm not saying us, but a lot of fans, they're never happy, no matter what comes out.
Well, that's true. That's true. Alan, your turn.
Okay. So, when you talk about preserving the legacy, I think we're talking about several different things here, and what we've mainly been talking about is not so much preserving the legacy as making the legacy available to us. In terms of preserving the legacy, I think that we don't really know what the solo guys have done, but we know that with the group, EMI has gone through every single tape they have and have cataloged it. I mean, starting with John Barrett and then Lewison. I mean, that was partly, the book was really a byproduct of what EMI was really interested in, which is having a good catalog and everything sort of listened to and annotated. That's what they wanted out of it. Mm-hmm. And the book, I think, was sort of, almost a brilliant sort of marketing outgrowth of what their original plan was. They've transferred all the stuff to digital. They've gone back and transferred the multi-tracks before they were bounced down to digital so that you can now do remixes. I mean, in terms of preserving legacy, the stuff that we don't see, that Apple and EMI, or now Universal, have done really is, they've done a serious job of that.
Let me ask one thing. You brought up something that was kind of interesting. They have not gone through all the solo tapes and cataloged them?
Well, we don't know that because they each, I feel pretty sure from what we can tell that the Harrison family is doing it with George's tapes. It looks like MPL is doing it pretty thoroughly with McCartney's tapes because as they do each of these, even if they hadn't done it before, as they do each of these reissues, like that's a lot of material to go through, and they're going through it.
And I think you can almost say that Sean, the Lennon estate has gone through his stuff too.
Yeah, actually, I think they have. Because Yoko has remixed them once, remastered them once. I think they. I know that when they were putting together that anthology box, they went through everything. But I'm not sure that I guess they didn't have to do what EMI has done with, going back to the pre-bounced multi-tracks, because by the time they were doing the solo stuff, they probably had as many tracks as they needed and didn't need to do that. So, that was probably a little easier for them. In terms of Ringo, I don't know what he's done, but I do know that a few years ago, his publicist said that he was sort of collecting copies of the interviews he'd done, and she asked me for copies for the ones I had done with him. So, he must be putting together some kind of an archive.
Well, he's told Chris Carter a couple of times he was working on, some kind of collection, but we have yet to see that.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of a shame, as we talked about when we were talking about his solo legacy.
Right.
What do you mean by collection? I mean, I heard that he said an Apple Years box set like what George had.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm referring to. Yeah, he was, but I mean, any kind of anthology of his stuff, obviously there hasn't been any big, anthology, as we talked about when we talked about the Ringo thing 2 weeks ago. So no, but he has said that there is some kind of a project that's been in his, that has been in his vision.
Right.
But it hasn't happened. So
with
go
the
ahead,
group, I mean, in addition to, when I think of preserving the legacy, I'm thinking more in terms of what they're doing with the raw materials that they have apart from what they're giving us, and have to give them pretty high marks for all of that transferring and getting back to the multi-tracks, the pre-bounce downs, and all of that, because that will make a lot of things possible that had never been possible before, the remixes and things like that. They similarly, Apple has spent a lot of time seeing to its film archives. I mean, for a while, Ron Furmanak was there. They've had other people going through and cataloging and just looking through a lot of footage that they have collected where, it hadn't necessarily been looked at. And that's why we have the Hey Bulldog promo. They sort of knew what that was, but hadn't necessarily had all of the raw materials before, and then realized that, wait a minute, we do have enough to actually show them doing Hey Bulldog. That in itself is kind of a big thing. I don't know how many other things like that there could be, probably not much. But, they're getting their film archive together too. Getting it out seems to be a little slow. Things move slowly there, but nevertheless, we talk about things moving slowly, and I mean, I am one of the biggest complainers and whiners, but to be fair, I have, various playlists set up in my Beatles stuff on my computer, and one of them is archival material. And for archival material they've released, meaning Hollywood Bowl, BBC, Anthology, the 1963 bootleg recordings that was Apple iTunes only, and then the Pepper stuff. Subtract a few because I have both versions of the first BBC album on there, and I have all of Pepper, including, the remixed, not just the outtakes. But all told, that playlist is 594 tracks. And that doesn't include remixes. my remix playlist, which has Let It Be Naked, Yellow Submarine Song Track 1, and, Love. That's 129 tracks. So, if you consider that the Beatles as a group released, a bit over 200 tracks, maybe, I'm not sure what the final total is. I could look on that playlist, but since I have both mono and stereo and all kinds of other stuff, I'll say the 1987 CDs playlist has 217 files on it. So they've really released multiples of what had been out in the official catalog. So, to be fair, much as I would like to see every single take, every single BBC recording, and every single live track released, they haven't done that bad a job. It's been, there's years between each interesting release, and quite often they do something like Steve was talking about, the editing in Anthology, I think the over-reverb in Hollywood Bowl, and the fact that they're not a separate 1964 and 65 concert, which they could do because only one of the 65 shows was bad in terms of technical stuff. Despite the fact that, we might have complaints about individual releases, they really have put out quite a lot. And then you look at video is a whole other thing. I mean, I thought that the one set, the deluxe one with the 2 discs, all those videos, I thought that was a really necessary and good release because you want to see those promos, and it's important. There should be the Hollywood Bowl film. They should restore the soundtrack to what it was, and and documentary things like Anthology and 8 Days a Week, are also important in terms of telling the story, no matter what is done in little bits of the story being told, whatever criticisms I might have. I think that those 2 things were important things for people to see who don't live with the stuff day in and day out like we do.
Okay. Ken, you want to respond to any of that?
I agree with just about everything Alan said there, except I honestly don't see the need for every outtake to come out. That's just me. That me personally. I mean, yes, would I love to hear it? Absolutely. But again, I know it's the Beatles.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with you, and I'd be absolutely fine with that if they just send it all to me.
Yes. I mean, what can I say? I mean, I think, the issue of whether, they should release everything, we can sit here and talk about this. I mean, I don't know. There's been. It just seems like there's never enough. But I'm glad that they've cataloged everything. They should do that if they haven't done it for all four of the Beatles individually. They should. I would suspect they probably have. I think that's probably something that you do nowadays because it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, see, a lot of it isn't in EMI's or Apple's hands. A lot of it is in their hands individually, so it's sort of up to them to do.
Oh, I see.
I don't see all 4 parties agreeing to releasing everything. I think we just made a major breakthrough this year with Sgt. Pepper.
Right.
So, I think we're going to see more projects like that.
I again, as we've said before, I don't think we'll see the extensiveness of Sgt. Pepper continued with everything. I think we can almost imagine if White Album is indeed going to be the next one, what the White Album is going to have, and you can probably, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
We'll finally get those. We'll finally get those acoustic tracks, but I don't think, there's only so far they can go. But then again, the Sgt. Pepper thing sold really, really well. Yeah. And so, maybe that opened the door.
You see, here's the thing. When it comes to the question of all the outtakes, the first question you would have really would be, what would their objection be? And their objection would be probably if there's something embarrassing. And from the outtakes we've heard, even when they make mistakes, it's kind of funny, not in a we're laughing at them for making mistakes way, but because they had such a sense of humor that comes through, particularly at times like that. They'll make a mistake and John will make a tart comment, and it'll just be funny, and it's their personality. It's like infuses everything, and I think that's what undercuts the possibility of any kind of embarrassment for bad takes, because there may be bad takes, there may be a breakdown, and it just doesn't matter. That that's what happens in the studio, and they were funny about it when it did. So, of course.
But you're expecting the Beatles to feel the same way that you do.
I can persuade them.
Let me ask you guys, based on what we know now, as opposed to what we knew at the beginning of the year when we hit this question then, what do you think we're getting for Christmas?
Nothing.
Alan?
Yeah,
really?
I haven't heard any rumors of anything, and we know that they take a long time to do projects. So, we haven't heard any inklings of them doing, say, a Magical Mystery Tour box or anything like that. I think they've sort of left that to HMC, which has put out video outtakes, which are quite interesting. In some ways more interesting than the film itself. What they probably should do, since they've put out, just within recent years, a restored Magical Mystery Tour film, is maybe edit an alternate Magical Mystery Tour film like HMC did, but using, the material they have in crisp, perfect shape, and show really what an interesting film it could have been. But, I haven't heard any rumors about that happening, and kind of like it's the middle of October, so I would be happily surprised, but surprised, if they did come up with something for the holidays.
Ken?
Well, if you've noticed in recent years, you usually find out about a Beatles release very close to its release. Maybe, if you're lucky, a month before it comes out. And that's what it's been like the last few years. If I was to think of anything that might come out, it would be something from Magical Mystery Tour. But I'm not just thinking about the movie itself. I'm thinking about the songs. You could do a remastered Magical Mystery Tour with outtakes of songs from there, although we've already gotten outtakes of Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which we talked about before. What do you do about that? But I haven't heard of anything. Concrete, But my guess is that we'll get the White Album next year, and that's going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, same here. I haven't heard anything concrete either. I hope they surprise us and come up with something, though. That would be great. God, I don't know why, but if anything comes out, I'm still holding out for Let It Be on DVD. That would be easy. That would be.
But they might as well save that for 2019.
2020.
Well,
what if I'm not around in 2020? What if I'm not around in 2020?
Well, you just have to be.
Oh, okay.
Hey, I've got this deal about Helter Skelter, so you might as well have one about Let It Be.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just sort of, looking up. I haven't found it yet, but I was looking up how long before Pepper they released the info about it when they put the press release out.
It seemed like it was only like 3 weeks or so, wasn't it?
It was more than that, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And even the Beatles One, the Beatles One Plus, we found out pretty close to its release. It's pretty guarded, this information.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that much is very true. There used to be a time, and I've mentioned this before, where they would divulge stuff. Way back when I interviewed Yoko the first time, she told me about the John Lennon box set. That would never happen now, Ringo talked about, was it Yellow Submarine he talked about? They won't do it now. They will not. They will just flat out not say. They want to keep, they want the surprise.
Well,
which is really
they could do the Shea Stadium film. I mean, they've. We don't know what the period of exclusivity for theater showing was around the time. When they brought out 8 days a week, there was some sort of exclusive deal where it would only be shown in the theaters. But that I don't think was for perpetuity. I think that was just for a period. And they've had that ready since before the anthology, and I'm sure if they've fixed it up a bit since, that could come out.
Well, here's something here, guys. Just looking on Amazon, I don't know what these are. There are a bunch of Beatles CDs coming December 15th. It says $46.99.
And it doesn't say what?
It doesn't say what. It says imports. It says imports 2017.
For the record, the Sgt. Pepper press release came out on April 5th.
Okay, and that was due for June.
Yeah.
So
or the
2
very
months.
end of May.
Almost.
But there is something coming December 15th. There's a ton of them. I would guess that these are maybe just maybe SHMs from Japan.
Do they give a label?
The first, let me look at one of them. It says imports. I mean, but they usually don't. They've gotten wise to the fact that people are looking at these things. So I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of curious that those are there. There's nothing on DVD that's coming. So, but there's a bunch of CDs, whatever they are. So
that's all we have to do. Look on Amazon to find out when anything new is coming out now.
Right. That's about it. That's about it. So, anyway, we are running right up close to the end of the hour, gentlemen. Let's go one at a time. Ken, briefly tell everybody where people can get a hold of you.
You can reach me at my email address, which is everylittlething@att.net. You can always visit my website at kenmichaelsradio.com. If you could, I have a few things I need to plug because it's all happening this week and next week. You can actually win tickets on my website to see Joe Walsh in concert because he's performing at Mohegan Sun in their arena on November 3rd. This is part of his Vets Rock Tour. This will benefit the Connecticut USO and the Veterans Expo at Mohegan Sun. If you go to my website, I've got a contest running now through October 22nd. Very easy to win, so if you live in the New England area, if you want to see Joe Walsh at Mohegan Sun November 3rd, you can enter that contest on my website. I know I mentioned this the last couple of weeks. I have a special contest to win Brian Wilson's new compilation. I just wanted to wait until I got it in the mail. It's starting this Thursday, October the 19th. It's called Playback, the Brian Wilson Anthology on CD. And we had Ken Womack on our show not long ago. I did an interview with Ken, which is going to be on my website soon. But I'm now giving you the chance to win his new book on George Martin called Maximum Volume, The Beatles Producer George Martin, The Life of Beatles Producer George Martin, 1926 to 1966. That's on my Beatles Trivia and Games page. And one last thing, I was just interviewed on a wonderful podcast show, and it's called Friends of Dan podcast. Dan Miles is the host. He does incredible interviews. He's been doing this for several years, really in-depth interviews. I talked for over 2 hours talking about the Beatles. It's now posted on his website. If you get a chance, give it a listen. The website is friendsofdan.com, and it's also on iTunes. It's really a great interview show.
Thank you, Ken. Alan, how can people get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way is on Facebook, either under Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed, my alter ego.
Okay, and you can get a hold of me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I have a Beatles news page called Beatles News and Information on Facebook. To get a hold of the show, you can to yell at us or compliment us or send us money. You can write to us at thingswesaidtoday@gmail.com. We have a Beatles Things We Said Today Beatles radio show page and a Things We Said Today show page on Facebook. The second page is tied in with the Fab4Radio.com broadcasts. And thank you, Matt, for broadcasting us every week. And thank you to Michael Lynch for composing the theme song, which we never credit, but I'm doing that now. Thank you, Michael. I think we've covered all the bases, and I think we are through. So for Ken Michaels and Alan Kozin, this is Steve Marinucci saying thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.